But even then, his conclusion is, as you heard, that at some point the peak would be reached of the carrying capacity of the German territory despite these improvements. The carrying capacity of the environment being the maximum population size of a biological species that can be sustained by a specific environment. Here is how he says it.
The idea of increasing the yield of the soil within borders that have been fixed once and forever is an old one. The history of human cultivation of the soil is one of permanent progress, permanent improvement, and therefore of increasing yields. While the first part of this progress lay in the field of methods of soil cultivation as well as in the construction of settlements, the second part lies in increasing the value of the soil artificially through the introduction of nutritious matter that is lacking or insufficient. This line leads from the hoe of former times up to the modern steam plow, from stable manure up to present artificial fertilizers. Without doubt, the productivity of the soil has thereby been infinitely increased, but it is just as certain that there is a limit somewhere.
He goes on to say that the same argument he had against increasing the productivity of the soil also works against internal colonization.
Regardless of how Italy, or let's say Germany, carry out the internal colonization of their soil, regardless of how they increase the productivity of their soil further through scientific and methodical activity, there always remains the disproportion of the number of their population to the soil. The effects that it is hoped to achieve through internal colonization, in particular, rest on a fallacy. The opinion that we can bring about a considerable increase in the productivity of the soil is false. Regardless of how, for example, the land is distributed in Germany, whether in large or in small peasant holdings or in plots for small settlers, this does not alter the fact that there are, on the average, 136 people to 1 square kilometer. This is an unhealthy relation. By increasing the productivity of the soil, however, some alleviation of a folk's lot could be achieved. But in the long run, this would never exempt it from the duty to adapt the nation's living space, become insufficient to the increased population. It is impossible to feed our folk on this basis and under this premise.
Hitler also makes it clear that he dislikes to bring attention to this idea in the first place because he does not see a complete solution to the problem in it. He only views increasing productivity of the soil as something that would mitigate or reduce the problem slightly, but not solve it.
Indeed, it would only create confusion to set the slogan of internal colonization before the masses, who will then latch their hopes onto it and thereby think to have found a means of doing away with their present distress. This would not at all be the case. It will often be harmful for a nation's foreign policy position because it awakens hopes which can remove a folk from realistic thinking. The ordinary, respectable citizen will then really believe that he can find his daily bread at home through industry and hard work, rather than realize that the strength of a folk must be concentrated in order to win new living space. For us Germans, the slogan of inner colonization is catastrophic, if for no other reason, because it automatically reinforces us in the opinion that we have found a means which, in accordance with the pacifistic tendency, allows us to earn our right to exist by labor in a life of sweet slumbers. Once this doctrine were taken seriously in our country, it would mean the end of every exertion to preserve for ourselves the place which is our due. Once the average German became convinced that he could secure his life and future in this way, all attempts at an active and hence alone fertile defense of German vital necessities would be doomed to failure. In the face of such an attitude on the part of the nation, any really beneficial foreign policy could be regarded as buried, and with it, the future of the German people as a whole.
So despite being able to make improvements in productivity, Hitler's opinion was that Germany's internal and domestic food situation was doomed sooner or later. That is, at least as long as Germany wanted to be self-sustainable in their food. But what if Germany would not have to be self-sustainable on their food production? And here it gets interesting, because several new possibilities are discussed in his books. One option he discusses is to buy food from other countries to be able to grow Germany's population. But with what means? By producing and selling more from German industry. Here is what Hitler has to say about that idea.
Economics which especially today is regarded by many as the savior from distress and care, hunger and misery, can under certain preconditions give a folk possibilities for existence which lie outside its relation to its own soil. But this is linked to a number of prerequisites. It would involve the increase of commodity production and the conversion of the domestic economy into an export economy. We could produce for foreign needs through industry and commerce and defray the cost of living from the proceeds. The sense of such an economic system lies in the fact that a nation produces more of certain vital commodities than it requires for its own use. It sells this surplus outside its own national community, and with the proceeds therefrom, it procures those foodstuffs and also the raw materials which it lacks. Thus, this kind of economics involves not only a question of production, but in at least as great a degree, a question of selling. There is much talk, especially at the present time, about increasing production. But it is completely forgotten that such an increase is of value only as long as a buyer is at hand.
So essentially he's saying, yes, it is possible that Germany produces more and that they sell in order to be able to buy more food, but he also says that everything depends on if there are enough buyers. He continues. Check out the next part of this documentary below.